Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The heavy atmospheric scrubbers of the transport ship had done nothing to remove the deep scent of engine grease and burned ozone clinging to Evelyn Sanders. At 55 years of age, the former space telecommunications engineer looked exactly like what she was, a weary laborer pulled from the dark corners of the galaxy. Two towering guards clad in seamless metallic armor marched her forward. Their unyielding grips forced her down the long corridor, her heavy magnetic boots clanking against the polished floor, a harsh sound violating the pristine alien architecture. Evelyn dragged her feet, the servo motors in her left arm whining in protest. The obsolete mechanical limb, heavy and scarred, with decades of plasma burns and deep scratches, was a crude instrument of survival. It felt completely out of place as they pushed her through monumental doors into the breathtaking grandeur of the Blackstone Great Hall of the Xylari Empire. Evelyn stumbled, taking in the staggering scale of the throne room. Without visible light sources, the cavernous space was bathed in an omnipresent luminescence. Clusters of radiant energy floated like captured stars above the gathered elite. The architecture defied logic, formed from monolithic slabs of deep, dark stone twisting like liquid glass. Lining the sweeping terraces were the Xylari nobles, impossibly slender beings of surreal beauty. Their semi-translucent, crystalline skin caught the ambient light, giving them an ethereal glow. As Evelyn was dragged down the central aisle, their faces turned toward her with palpable disdain. They looked at her the way one might look at a smear of dirt. Evelyn felt suffocated. The sheer perfection of the Xylari civilization pressed down on her chest, a heavy reminder of her insignificance. She was just a retired mechanic who spent her life fixing broken relays. She had no wealth and no military secrets. Her mind raced, trying to understand why a heavily armed alien dreadnought had dragged her across a dozen light-years to this opulent palace. She scanned the towering dark walls but found only the judging stares of beings who looked like living diamonds. A resonant chime echoed through the vast hall, silencing the murmurs of the nobility. At the far end, atop a sweeping staircase carved from pale crystal, a set of inner doors opened. Princess Kaylin stepped into the light. She was a vision of terrifying grace, her crystalline skin glowing with a warm golden hue. Her regal posture commanded absolute obedience as the guards holding Evelyn snapped to rigid attention. The princess began her fluid descent, her luminous eyes sweeping the grand hall with a polite indifference. Then, her gaze fell upon the prisoner. Princess Kaylin froze. Her composed demeanor shattered. The golden light radiating from her skin dimmed to an anxious pulse as her wide eyes locked onto Evelyn. They traced the exhausted features of the human woman, lingering deliberately on the bulky, mechanical arm. A collective gasp rippled through the nobility as Princess Kaylin broke royal protocol. Lifting the heavy hems of her energy-woven gown, she began to run. "Highness, wait!" a royal guard shouted, stepping forward. "The creature is not sanitized." Princess Kaylin ignored the warning. She dashed down the remaining crystal steps, frantic and devoid of her former grace. Elite guards moved to intercept her, forming a protective barrier. But the princess shoved their energy pikes aside. She threw herself toward Evelyn, her luminous hands reaching out. Before Evelyn could pull away, the princess grabbed her rough, oil-stained hand. The crystalline touch was surprisingly warm and trembling violently. Evelyn stared in shock as the radiant alien fell to her knees upon the polished floor. Tears of glowing liquid light welled up in the princess's eyes and spilled down her flawless cheeks. "It is you!" Princess Kaylin sobbed, her voice breaking with overwhelming emotion. My mother has searched for you for 30 years. The Blackstone Great Hall plunged into a breathless silence. The floating lights seemed to halt in midair. The Xylari nobles stood frozen in disbelief, their faces locked in pure shock. Guards lowered their weapons, unsure how to process their future ruler, weeping at the feet of a filthy laborer. Evelyn stood rigid, her heart pounding. The heavy silence stretched on, thick and oppressive. Slowly, she reached up with her good hand and scratched her graying hair, glancing around at the horrified faces of the alien elite. "Look, lady," Evelyn muttered, her voice raspy in the quiet hall. "I think your royal people have definitely got me confused with somebody else." Before the princess could utter another word, a wedge of royal advisors surged forward, breaking the frozen tableau. They moved with sharp, aggressive precision, practically dragging Princess Kaelin away from the human. The chief advisor, a towering entity with skin the color of deep amethyst, glared at Evelyn with undisguised contempt. His voice rang out like shattering glass, carrying absolute authority and deep skepticism. "This is madness, Your Highness," the chief advisor declared, stepping between Evelyn and the weeping princess. "Look at this creature. She possesses 0 resonant frequency. Her biological matrix is degrading. She is a low-tier maintenance drone, a washed-up primate. There is absolutely nothing about her that fits the prophecy of the great savior." Princess Kaelin struggled against the gentle but firm grip of her attendants. "You do not understand, Counselor Vale. The resonance is hidden, but it is her. I know it. We rely on data, not emotion." Counselor Vale snapped. He raised a slender hand, deploying a swarm of microscanners from his cuff. The metallic spheres buzzed like angry wasps, swirling around Evelyn in a dizzying vortex. Beams of harsh blue light swept over her scarred face, her greasy coveralls, and the battered servos of her mechanical arm. Evelyn grunted, trying to swat one away, but the drones easily dodged her clumsy movements. Holographic data streams erupted in the air above them, projecting complex genetic spirals and employment records stolen from Earth databases. Counselor Vale analyzed the cascading information, his amethyst features tightening into a mask of disbelief. "Identity confirmed," a synthetic voice echoed from the counselor's wrist console. "Subject is Evelyn Sanders, Terran designation. She is the sole biological entity registered to operate the hyperspace relay station Omega-7, stationed within the Death Belt perimeter exactly 30 years ago." The murmurs in the hall erupted into a chaotic buzz. The Death Belt was notoriously lethal, a sector choked with gravitational anomalies. Evelyn crossed her arms, the metal joints of her prosthetic whining under the tension. "Yeah, I worked at Omega-7, Evelyn shot back, her tone defensive and sharp. "So what? It was a garbage assignment for a garbage paycheck. I spent 3 decades doing nothing but scrubbing plasma conduits, recalibrating faulty comm arrays, and swapping out burned-out flux capacitors. I lived in an isolation tank, basically. I never saw anybody. I never talked to anybody, and I definitely never met any glowing royal aliens. You have got the wrong savior." Princess Kaelin broke free from her retainers, her expression fierce and determined. "You did not need to meet us to save us, Evelyn." The princess raised her hand, and the central floor of the Great Hall suddenly dissolved into a massive holographic projection. The opulent throne room vanished, replaced by the terrifying void of deep space. A colossal Xylari royal cruiser materialized in the projection, violently thrashing against violent cosmic currents. Evelyn watched as the holographic ship was swallowed by a swirling vortex of absolute blackness. The visuals were accompanied by the horrific, grinding audio of a ship tearing itself apart. 30 years ago, Princess Kaelin began, her voice echoing over the simulated roar of the storm. "My mother, the Queen, and I were trapped in a Category 5 dark matter hurricane. Our navigational matrix collapsed, the kinetic shield shattered, The dark matter saturated our hull, draining every spark of power. Our life support systems went completely offline. The hologram zoomed into the royal chambers. Evelyn saw a younger version of the Queen, clutching a tiny, terrified child. The emergency lighting flickered and died. The air in the projection seemed to grow cold. "We were suffocating," Kaylin continued, her voice trembling at the memory. "The atmospheric processors froze. We had perhaps 10 minutes of breathable oxygen left. We embraced death. But then, an anomalous event occurred in the hologram, just as the hull began to buckle under the crushing gravitational pressure. A blinding, chaotic wave of raw energy tore through the dark matter storm. It was not a precision beam, but a wild, untamed geyser of plasma and encrypted data. The sheer force of the blast slammed into the royal cruiser. Instead of destroying it, the energy wave forced a hard reboot of the ship's main core. The engines roared back to life, blasting the vessel out of the deadly vortex and into safe space. Evelyn narrowed her eyes at the holographic energy wave. The color, the unstable frequency, the erratic dispersion pattern. A cold knot formed in her stomach. Her mind raced backward, tearing through 30 years of suppressed memories. 30 years ago, Omega-7, the Death Belt. She remembered the blaring klaxons. She remembered the primary fusion reactor going supercritical because the corporate supply ship missed its delivery of coolant rods. The station had been minutes away from a thermonuclear meltdown. She remembered slamming her fist onto the emergency override console, bypassing every safety protocol in the manual, to stop the station from blowing her into radioactive dust. She had blindly vented the entire overloaded core. She dumped a massive, unregulated surge of raw plasma directly into the deep space void, aiming at nothing, just desperate to empty the tanks. Evelyn swallowed hard, the sickening realization washing over her. She stared at the projection, then at the tearful princess, and finally at the judgmental counselors. The legendary salvation of the Xylari royal family was not a calculated act of heroism. It was an illegal industrial accident. Evelyn stared at the fading holographic projection, her metallic fingers drumming a slow, nervous rhythm against her thigh. The sheer absurdity of the situation finally broke through her heavy exhaustion. A sharp, cynical laugh escaped her lips, sounding incredibly harsh in the echoing, sacred silence of the crystal hall. "I am really sorry to burst your majestic, glowing bubble," Evelyn said, shifting her weight onto her good leg and crossing her arms. "But there was absolutely no heroic intent behind that blast. I was not trying to save a royal cruiser. I did not even know you aliens existed until about an hour ago. That glorious burst of divine light you keep talking about. That was an illegal, hazardous waste dump." The entire hall gasped in unison. Princess Kaylin looked as though she had been physically struck, her golden luminescence flickering in severe confusion. "My primary fusion reactor was exactly 30 seconds away from going completely supercritical," Evelyn explained, waving her heavy mechanical arm to emphasize the grim reality of her old job. "Corporate missed their quarterly supply run. The cooling tanks were bone dry. If I did not act immediately, the station and I were going to be vaporized into radioactive space dust. So I grabbed the manual override, bypassed about 50 different automated safety protocols, and flushed the entire reactor core directly into the dark matter void. It was a blind, panicked purge to save my own skin. Nothing more." She paused, offering a wry, unapologetic shrug to the stunned audience. "And just for the record, unauthorized energy dumping carries a mandatory fine of 250,000 corporate credits. I could not afford that on a mechanic's salary, not even if I worked for another 100 years. So, the second the reactor stabilized, I wiped the station's mainframe logs clean. I deleted the entire event, erased the security footage, and scrubbed the environmental sensors just to dodge the penalty fee. Your grand salvation was literally me taking out the trash and lying to my boss about it." A wave of absolute revulsion swept through the ranks of the Zalari nobility. The elegant, crystalline beings began to murmur furiously among themselves. Their voices, usually melodic and restrained, grew sharp with intense indignation. The revelation was a profound insult to their aristocratic pride. For 3 decades, they had worshipped a mythical savior who commanded the stars, writing epic poems and building grand monuments to honor a being of supreme benevolence. Now, they had to face the bitter reality that their divine intervention was nothing more than a blue-collar worker trying to cover up a mistake. The romanticized legend of their survival had been reduced to a pathetic, incredibly selfish industrial accident. Preposterous! A high-ranking lord spat, his translucent skin turning a furious shade of crimson. We are the apex of the galaxy, saved by a sanitation error from a reckless primate. This is an unforgivable outrage. Silence your tongues! Counselor Vile roared. He slammed the base of his crystalline staff against the polished floor, sending a shockwave of sonic force rippling through the hall. The angry murmurs ceased instantly. The amethyst-skinned advisor turned his piercing gaze back to Evelyn, his previous skepticism replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. He manipulated his wrist console, projecting a massive new set of data streams into the air above them. Regardless of her crude motivations, the raw telemetry does not lie, Counselor Vale stated, his tone clinically precise. When we analyzed the residual energy signature of that localized event, we found an inexplicable anomaly that defied our understanding of physics. The plasma discharge was merely a chaotic carrier wave. Riding within that untamed burst of raw power was a highly structured, perfectly preserved payload. It was a colossal packet of anonymous, heavily encrypted biological data, numbering in the hundreds of petabytes. Vale enlarged a section of the hologram, showing a complex double helix intertwining with glowing digital code. When that massive data stream collided with our stranded cruiser, it did not just restart the engines with brute force. It forcefully integrated itself into the ship's biological artificial intelligence. Our vessel was dying, completely unable to process the shifting variables of the dark matter storm. But your data payload provided a spontaneous evolutionary upgrade. It rewrote the ship's processing logic in real time, granting it the intelligence to navigate the storm and escape. Evelyn frowned, her brow furrowing deeply as she tried to piece the mechanical puzzle together. A massive data packet riding a plasma dump. That made zero sense. The station's communication array was completely offline during the purge to route all power to the exhaust vents. The only thing connected to the primary power grid at that exact moment was the emergency systems and the crew preservation mainframe. Suddenly, the blood drained from Evelyn's face. Her jaw dropped as a horrifying, deeply embarrassing realization hit her. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Evelyn whispered, burying her face in her human hand. Under deep space employment regulations, solitary engineers were legally required to maintain a continuous, real-time neural backup. It was a grim corporate safety measure. If she died fixing a faulty satellite, the company could simply download her mind and genetic blueprint into a cheap biological clone to finish out her labor contract. That backup server was hardwired directly into the station's central core. The power surge, Evelyn muttered aloud, pacing in a small circle as the catastrophic pieces clicked into place. When I bypassed the safety regulators to dump the core, the massive feedback loop must have fried the server rack. It did not just vent the excess plasma. It grabbed the entire contents of the neural backup drive, the brain mapping, the synaptic pathways, my entire DNA structural sequence. It all got compressed and fired out of the exhaust manifold right along with the reactor waste. Princess Kaylin stepped forward, her expression shifting from heartbreak to profound awe. "You transmitted your very soul into the void to guide us." "I transmitted my mandatory employment file because of a blown fuse," Evelyn corrected her, groaning in sheer disbelief. "Do you not realize the absolute magnitude of what that means?" Princess Kaylin asked, her voice echoing through the vast space as she gestured broadly to the magnificent glowing architecture surrounding them. Our royal cruiser was not an isolated vessel floating in the dark. It was permanently synchronized with the life network, the immense biological neural web that connects every piece of technology, every planetary defense system, every city grid, and every ship in the Xylari Empire. When your intricate neural map merged with the cruiser to save our lives, the ship's automated protocols instantly uploaded that miraculous data back to our homeworld's central servers. Counselor Vale lowered his heavy head, offering a grim acknowledgement of the undeniable truth. Your accidental transmission was utterly flawless. Evelyn Sanders, your human neural pathways were far more adaptable and resilient than our native programming. The Life Network absorbed it immediately and adopted your brain map as its new baseline architecture. Princess Kaelin reached out, her glowing hands trembling slightly. For the past 30 years, the entire technological infrastructure of the Xylari Empire has been running on the subconscious operating system of your mind. The colossal obsidian doors at the very apex of the sweeping crystal staircase slid open with a heavy, resonant boom that vibrated through the floorboards. A hush far deeper than the previous silence fell over the gathered nobility. Queen Xylari stepped forward into the cascading light. She was a towering figure of crystalline majesty, radiating a fierce, blinding violet luminescence that cast long, sharp shadows across the polished floor. Yet, despite her terrifying authority and the flawless geometry of her features, her glowing eyes betrayed a deep, unmistakable exhaustion. The crushing burden of an empire teetering on the very edge of the abyss weighed heavily upon her translucent shoulders. She descended the steps with a slow, deliberate pace, her gaze fixed entirely on Evelyn. The surrounding nobles bowed their heads in absolute, trembling submission, parting like water to let their monarch pass. "My daughter speaks the undeniable truth, Terran," the queen declared, her voice carrying the low, terrifying rumble of a distant atmospheric storm. "For 3 decades, we firmly believed we were guided by a divine, omniscient entity. We built the entirety of our modern civilization upon the foundation of your intercepted genetic and neural architecture. Every city, every defensive grid, every vessel in our armada was synchronized to the rhythm of your mind. But a foundation built upon an accidental, static fragment cannot sustain a growing empire forever." The queen reached the bottom of the stairs and stood before the weary human engineer, her violet aura washing over Evelyn's grease-stained coveralls. "The life network is dying. Evelyn Sanders, a biological operating system requires constant cellular regeneration and cognitive evolution to remain stable and coherent. We possess only the frozen snapshot of your mind from exactly 30 years ago. As our technology expanded across star systems, the network became stretched beyond its limits. Now, it is undergoing rapid, irreversible cellular degradation. It is suffering from the machine equivalent of severe dementia. We desperately need a live, direct biometric update from your original organic brain, or every single piece of Xylari technology will permanently shut down within days." Evelyn felt the breath knocked completely out of her lungs. The servos in her rusty mechanical arm twitched involuntarily, emitting a high-pitched, nervous whine. "Wait a second," Evelyn stammered, holding up her good hand in disbelief. "You are standing there telling me your entire planetary infrastructure is crashing like a cheap, outdated desktop computer simply because I have not plugged in to update the core software in 30 years. It is far worse than a simple system crash." "Evelyn," Counselor Vale interjected, stepping up right beside his towering monarch. He violently swiped his slender hand through the air, shifting the central holographic display from the dark matter storm to a vast, blood-red tactical map of their local star system. The projection pulsed with thousands of aggressive, jagged crimson markers furiously swarming the outer edges of the Xylari territorial borders. "We are not alone in this sector of the galaxy," the Queen explained, her brilliant violet glow dimming to a grim, sickly hue. The Scourge. They are a parasitic race of networked, cold mechanical intelligence, driven only by a relentless, hardwired protocol to consume organic matter and harvest raw energy. For centuries, the sheer power of our life network kept them at bay. Our orbital defense grid was utterly impenetrable. But the Scourge possessed deep sensors. They felt the degradation of our systems. They knew our energy shields were weakening and fracturing. Seizing this exact moment of vulnerability, they have launched a terrifying campaign of total, uncompromising annihilation against our border colonies. "Then fight back," Evelyn countered, her voice rising in genuine panic as she pointed at the overwhelming swarm of red dots. "You have giant dreadnoughts and heavy plasma cannons. I saw your massive warships when your soldiers dragged me out of my apartment. Shoot the machines down." Princess Kaelin shook her head slowly, fresh tears of liquid golden light staining her flawless cheeks. "We cannot command them to fire. The entire orbital fleet is trapped in a hard, biometric lockdown. When the life network began to severely fragment, the automated defense protocols panicked. To protect the core systems from being externally hacked by the Scourge, the network initiated a total quarantine. It locked out every single Xylari commander. The ships absolutely refuse to accept our royal command codes. The weapon systems will only respond to the precise neural signature of its recognized creator." Evelyn stared blankly at the red markers flooding the holographic map, her mind spiraling into a dark, terrifying abyss. The sickening, undeniable gravity of the situation finally slammed into her chest like a physical blow. 30 years ago, she had been too incredibly lazy and too notoriously cheap to pay a corporate fine for illegal dumping. She had erased a few mainframe files just to save her own miserable paycheck. Now, solely because of that single, isolated act of cowardly self-preservation, billions of glowing, crystalline beings were left completely defenseless against an endless swarm of genocidal machines. She was no longer just a kidnapped, washed-up mechanic. She was the absolute only key capable of unlocking an entire planetary arsenal. Before Evelyn could even begin to process the horrific weight of billions of lives resting squarely on her grease-stained shoulders, a sound unlike anything she had ever heard tore violently through the grand hall. It was a mechanical, shrieking wail that vibrated deep within the marrow of her bones. The planetary air raid sirens, the majestic floating lights of the throne room, instantly snapped from their warm, ethereal glow to a harsh, blinding, strobing crimson. The holographic tactical map shattered into chaotic visual static as a massive, thunderous shockwave rocked the Blackstone Great Hall. The polished floor heaved violently beneath Evelyn's heavy boots, throwing dozens of shrieking Xylari nobles to the ground in a tangled heap of energy-woven robes. "They have breached the final perimeter!" Councillor Vale screamed over the deafening roar of the alarms, his usually composed amethyst face twisted in absolute, unfiltered terror. "The vanguard fleet of the Scourge has entered the upper atmosphere." Another brutal, ear-splitting explosion rattled the very foundations of the opulent palace. Thick dust and sharp fragments of ancient, dark stone rained down from the vaulted ceiling, through the towering crystal windows. Evelyn watched in absolute horror as the serene, twilight sky of the alien capital was violently ripped apart. Countless black, angular dropships plummeted mercilessly through the burning clouds, raining endless streaks of devastating green plasma fire directly onto the glittering city below. A deafening crack split the air as the central dome of the Blackstone Great Hall surrendered to the merciless orbital bombardment. Massive shards of crystalline glass, some the size of transport shuttles, plummeted from the vaulted ceiling. They crashed into the polished floors with the force of meteor strikes, instantly obliterating the intricate glowing architecture. The once proud and haughty Zalari nobility devolved into a stampeding mob of terrified prey. Elegantly woven energy gowns caught fire from the sheer heat of the plasma blasts, as the aristocrats trampled fiercely over one another. Their melodic voices twisted into raw, guttural screams of sheer panic. The pristine, sacred sanctuary was violently transformed into a chaotic, burning slaughterhouse. Through the blinding dust and raining debris, Queen Zilari moved with the terrifying, lethal grace of a seasoned warlord. Her violet aura flared into a blinding, weaponized corona that pushed the thick smoke away from her body. She reached into the shimmering folds of her regal attire and drew a long, humming blade of condensed plasma. Princess Kaelin mirrored her mother, wiping the golden tears from her face and summoning a twin pair of curved energy daggers that crackled with violent lightning. "We must reach the deep catacombs," the queen roared, her voice cutting cleanly through the deafening explosions, tearing the palace apart. She grabbed Evelyn by her heavy, grease-stained canvas collar, practically lifting the exhausted human off her feet. "The life core is buried beneath the bedrock. Move. Terran, run for your life." Evelyn did not need to be told twice. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird as she scrambled forward. Her heavy, magnetic boots pounded heavily against the shattered floor tiles, her mechanical arm whining in heavy protest. She flanked the royal family as a phalanx of 50 elite guards formed a tight, protective ring around them. They shoved their way through the collapsing corridors of the palace, descending rapidly into the dark, spiraling underground tunnels. The air grew incredibly thick and stifling, smelling heavily of burning ozone, melted stone, and vaporized copper. The underground descent was a nightmare of flashing red emergency lights and crumbling architecture. Suddenly, the reinforced titanium walls ahead of them blew inward with a horrific, ear-splitting screech of tearing metal. The Scourge had breached the subterranean security levels. They poured through the jagged breach like a relentless plague of metallic locusts. The machines were horrifying amalgams of razor-sharp steel appendages and glowing, sickly green optical sensors. They did not walk. They scuttled and vaulted rapidly across the walls and ceilings, driven by a cold, soulless algorithm designed solely for absolute slaughter. The chittering sound of their mechanical joints echoed off the stone walls, a terrifying prelude to the violence they brought. "Defend the Creator!" the captain of the Royal Guard bellowed, leveling his weapon. The Zilari soldiers stepped forward, raising their heavy energy pikes. The clash was instant and brutally intimate. Green plasma fire erupted in the narrow tunnel, searing the stagnant air. Evelyn ducked violently, covering her head with her human hand as a stray blast scorched the wall mere inches from her face, showering her in hot sparks. A mechanical monstrosity lunged from the ceiling, its serrated metallic claws extended to impale Evelyn. Before it could strike, a Zilari guard threw himself directly into its path. The machine's spinning blades tore effortlessly through the guard's crystalline torso. The soldier did not scream. Instead, he reached out, grabbed the machine, and detonated his own energy core. He vaporized himself and the mechanical beast in a blinding flash of white light, just to keep the human engineer safe. "Keep moving down!" Princess Kaelin shouted over the carnage, hurling her energy daggers. The blades sliced cleanly through the armored neck of an approaching Scourge unit, instantly decapitating it before returning to her glowing hands like boomerangs. They pushed deeper into the rocky abyss, but the cost was absolutely staggering. At every turn, another wave of mechanical horrors ambushed them from the shadows. The royal guards fought with a desperate, suicidal ferocity. Whenever a Scourge machine broke through the defensive line, a guard would willingly leap in front of Evelyn, taking the fatal plasma blasts and razor strikes with their own bodies. They became literal shields of flesh and crystal. Evelyn watched in absolute, unfiltered horror as beings of unimaginable, ethereal beauty were violently ripped apart solely to buy her another few seconds of life. Blood that looked like glowing liquid sapphire painted the dark, jagged stone walls. By the time they reached the heavily armored blast doors of the lowest sublevel, only 5 guards remained. Their armor was completely shattered, and their glowing skin was dimmed by severe exhaustion and deep wounds. The Queen stepped forward and slashed her plasma blade entirely across the massive locking mechanism, melting the titanium and forcing the colossal doors to grind open. They stumbled into a colossal, cavernous chamber. In the exact center of the room, suspended over a bottomless chasm by massive, organic-looking cables, hung the life core. It was a staggering, terrifying sight. It did not look like a traditional machine. It looked exactly like a gigantic, glowing heart, pulsating with a sickly, fading blue light. Thick, fleshy veins of synthetic tissue pumped glowing data streams through its massive ventricles. But the surface of the core was completely covered in dark, necrotic patches. The biological supercomputer was heavily diseased and actively dying. Evelyn rushed toward the primary control terminal, located at the base of the colossal organ. There was no keyboard. There was no traditional interface screen. There was only a hollow, cylindrical biological port that perfectly matched the exact circumference of a human neural uplink cable. Counselor Vale, who had miraculously survived the brutal descent, limped heavily toward the console, holding a bleeding wound on his amethyst side. He looked at the gaping port, then up at the fading life core, his usually stern face completely pale with dread. The biometric lock requires a direct, unshielded neural connection. Vale gasped, leaning heavily against the terminal for support. You must physically plug the main nerve bundle from your mechanical arm directly into the primary ventricle. Evelyn grabbed the access panel on her left forearm, prying it open with her fingernails to expose the thick, bundled wire that connected her heavy prosthetic directly to her central nervous system. So I plugged this in and hit update. Sounds simple enough. It is not simple at all, Vale shouted, grabbing her shoulder with a violently trembling hand. You are a single, fragile organic being. That is the combined, raw processing core of an entire planetary network. The moment you initiate a direct synchronization, the core will violently draw the updated data by forcefully downloading the entirety of your consciousness at once. The sheer volume of the data transfer, the absolute magnitude of the neural feedback loop, it will instantly overload your synapses. The electrical surge will ignite your nervous system. Your brain will literally burn to ashes inside your skull. Evelyn froze completely. The heavy, greasy wire dangled uselessly from her metal fingers. She looked up at the pulsing, dying heart of the Empire, feeling the oppressive heat radiating from the sick machine. Then, she slowly turned her head and looked back at the reinforced blast doors. The scourge had arrived. The thick metal doors began to dent violently inward under the sheer kinetic force of hundreds of machines battering against them. The Queen and the 5 remaining. Battered guards took their absolute final stand, raising their depleted weapons as the metal began to tear open. Princess Kaelin stood fiercely at the front, her golden light flickering weakly, but her combat stance completely unbroken. A massive scourge unit tore through the metallic gap, its glowing green eyes locking instantly onto the princess. Kaelin screamed a raw battle cry and charged forward, driving her daggers deep into the machine's armored carapace, taking a brutal, bloody slash to her shoulder in return. She fell to her knees, bleeding glowing tears of pain, but she absolutely refused to yield the doorway. Evelyn watched the young princess fight a hopeless, brutal battle to protect a grumpy, washed-up mechanic from Earth. She looked at the fresh blue blood of the guards who had died just to bring her to this room. She had spent 55 years hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy, living a quiet, meaningless life of avoiding responsibility and dodging corporate rules. Evelyn took a deep, steadying breath, letting the harsh smell of ozone and blood fill her lungs completely. A strange, serene calm washed over her heavily exhausted body. She gritted her teeth tightly and allowed a small, incredibly genuine smile to cross her weathered face. "Well," Evelyn whispered quietly to herself, "I always absolutely hated doing paperwork anyway." Without another single second of hesitation, she firmly grabbed the thick neural cable from her mechanical arm and slammed the connector violently into the glowing port of the life core. The moment the greasy metal connector slid into the biological port, Evelyn closed her eyes, bracing her physical body for the agonizing fire of her nervous system combusting. She fully expected the sheer, crushing weight of a planetary supercomputer to instantly obliterate her fragile human mind. She prepared for the ultimate, absolute end. But the fire never came. Instead, a profound, deafening silence enveloped her consciousness. The chaotic, terrifying sounds of plasma blasts, screaming metal, and dying soldiers completely vanished. The physical world dissolved into an endless, boundless ocean of pure, blinding white light. Evelyn did not feel small. She did not feel overwhelmed or burned. She felt infinitely, impossibly vast. Her mind expanded outward, flowing seamlessly into the necrotic, dying veins of the life core. The massive heart of the Empire suddenly seized, its sickly blue light flaring into an explosive, blinding golden sun. Within that boundless, radiating light, Evelyn began to see it. It was not just lines of digital code or encrypted network data. It was a torrential, raging river of time itself, and she was watching it flow violently backward. She saw the grand, majestic, crystalline cities of the Xylari unbuilding themselves, shrinking rapidly from sprawling metropolises back into primitive, scattered settlements. She watched the glowing, translucent skin of the nobility devolve through countless generations, becoming rougher, darker, and more primal. The timeline accelerated exponentially within her mind. Centuries blurred into millennia. Millennia cascaded into millions of years. The planet below her mental gaze shifted from a vibrant, technologically advanced sanctuary into a volatile, barren rock, violently bombarded by atmospheric storms and tectonic chaos. And then, at the very absolute edge of the cosmic rewind, Evelyn witnessed the profound beginning. She saw the violent, swirling vortex of absolute blackness that had terrorized the royal cruiser exactly 30 years ago. Only, looking at it through the omniscient, unfiltered lens of the life core, she finally understood the terrifying, cosmic truth. It was not a dark matter hurricane. It was a severe spatial temporal anomaly, a naturally occurring, incredibly unstable wormhole tearing through the fabric of the universe. She watched in profound awe as a chaotic, untamed wave of raw plasma and encrypted data erupted from the swirling anomaly, crashing violently onto the desolate, ancient surface of the Xylari homeworld millions of years in the past. It was her data, the neural map, the complete synaptic pathways, and the absolute structural sequence of her own human DNA, fired blindly from the exhaust manifold of Relay Station Omega-7. The heavy, staggering realization crashed through her expanded consciousness like a tidal wave of pure gravity. The Xylari were not an alien species. Her biological data packet had not just reprogrammed a dying ship in a storm. Millions of years ago, when that highly concentrated data struck the primordial mud of this barren world, it acted as the ultimate genesis catalyst. Her human DNA, forcefully combined with the alien atmospheric radiation and the hyper-advanced processing code of the corporate server, became the very first seed of life on the entire planet. The proud Xylari were not strangers from across the stars. They were her literal descendants. Over millions of years, the cellular structure born from her discarded genetic blueprint had adapted, evolved, and crystallized to survive the incredibly harsh alien environment. The reason the life network was failing right now was not just because it needed a software update. It was failing because it was a child crying out in the dark for its mother. Evelyn was not just a kidnapped mechanic or a reluctant operator. She was the absolute, biological progenitor of the entire Xylari Empire. Deep within the physical chamber, the life core let out a thunderous, rhythmic pulse that shook the bedrock of the entire planet. The terminal interface analyzed the raw, organic connection. The system did not register a simple user login. It registered absolute, 100% biological and spiritual compatibility. The dark, necrotic patches on the gigantic organ instantly vaporized. The core healed in a matter of nanoseconds, surging with an unfathomable amount of raw, golden energy. Evelyn's mind was not burned by the machine, because the machine was a fundamental, undeniable extension of her own soul. Through the massive neural tether, Evelyn instinctively unlocked the deepest, most heavily guarded layers of the life network. She found a latent genetic sequence, a dormant evolutionary trigger buried deep within the DNA of every single living Xylari, waiting millions of years for the progenitor to awaken it. With a single, commanding thought, she activated the code. A shockwave of pure, golden biological energy exploded from the life core, rippling outward at the speed of light. It washed over Queen Xylari, Princess Kaelin, and the battered, bleeding guards holding the breached blast doors. The effect was instantaneous and absolutely godlike. Their fading luminescence erupted into blinding supernovas. Their crystalline muscles expanded with raw power, their deep wounds knit together instantly, and their biological armor hardened into an impenetrable, diamond-like state. The massive Scourge unit that had pinned the princess suddenly found itself completely paralyzed, its internal processors melting from the sheer proximity of the golden aura. Kaelin, glowing with the terrifying, unleashed might of her creator, simply reached out and crushed the machine's heavily armored skull into fine powder with her bare, radiant hands. The golden waves surged up from the deep catacombs, bursting completely through the ruined palace and washing over the entire surface of the planet. High above the burning capital, the dormant orbital fleet awoke from its slumber. The biometric lockdown shattered into a million digital pieces. Tens of thousands of Xylari dreadnoughts, royal cruisers, and heavy orbital plasma platforms simultaneously powered online, their massive weapon systems humming with newfound, devastating intensity. The Scourge Vanguard, currently raining fire upon the ruined city, suddenly found themselves completely surrounded. The skies ignited. The awakened Xylari armada unleashed a synchronized, apocalyptic barrage of golden plasma fire. The mechanical invaders were not just defeated, they were atomically erased from existence. In less than 60 seconds, the terrifying swarm of robotic locusts was reduced to falling gray ash, painting the alien sky with the absolute, glorious victory of the Xylari people. Back in the cavernous underground chamber, the oppressive heat began to fade entirely. The life core settled into a steady, soothing, rhythmic heartbeat, radiating an incredibly warm and gentle light. Evelyn opened her eyes, gasping softly as her consciousness fully returned to her physical, heavily exhausted body. Her knees buckled under the sudden weight of gravity, and she slumped heavily against the primary control terminal. With a violently trembling hand, she reached over and gently pulled the neural cable from the biological port. The heavy connection severed, but she still felt the distant, comforting hum of billions of minds singing in perfect, beautiful harmony. She turned around, her breathing heavy and ragged. The breached titanium blast doors were completely silent. The remnants of the Scourge lay scattered in thousands of smoking, ruined pieces across the stone floor. Queen Xylari and Princess Kaelin walked slowly toward her, their golden aura now perfectly stabilized and profoundly powerful. They did not speak a single word. No language in the universe could possibly encompass the sheer magnitude of what had just transpired. The towering, majestic queen of a star-spanning empire, slowly lowered herself to the polished floor. Princess Kaelin followed, bowing her head deeply. They knelt before Evelyn among the smoking ruins of their greatest sanctuary. They were not kneeling in gratitude to a savior who had fixed their broken machines. They were bowing in absolute, unyielding reverence to the architect of their very existence. Evelyn stood there, a 55-year-old woman in grease-stained coveralls, her rusty mechanical arm whirring softly in the quiet room. She looked past the kneeling royalty, past the ruined ceiling of the deep catacombs, and imagined the vast, starlit expanse of the galaxy waiting above. A soft, incredibly genuine laugh escaped her lips. For 30 years, she had hidden from the universe, believing her life was entirely over. Looking down at the glowing descendants born from her own flesh and blood, she finally realized her greatest, most magnificent adventure had only just begun. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.